Well, I grew up in Gove City, went to high school at Gove High School and grade school there. And then after graduating in 1941, that was when the World War I started, you know, when the Japs took over in the Pacific. And after graduation, then of course my brother and sister had both. My brother started at Kansas State and he came back to Fort Hays. And my sister, they were older than I was, they went to Fort Hays State. And my mother went to Fort Hays Normal before that. I didn't really choose the Army. I got 1 year of college in, and they wanted to know a little bit about people wanting to join services, and so I tried to get in the V5, V7 program, and I passed everything except my ear, eyes, nose, and throat. In 1940, I had a perforated, my good old dad took me down to Salina, and Dr. Armstrong operated on my nose and cut this cartridge out here. And I didn't have sinuses or things like that after that. But I found out after going in to try to become an officer, you cannot be an officer and have a perforated nostril septum. I tried to get into the V7 and the V5 program, and then I tried to get in the Army Air Force or the Air Force. And same old 10, 2, and 4, they rejected me on account of my ear, eyes, nose, and throat, which was my nose. And then I had to get in something or be drafted, so I enlisted in the enlisted Army Reserve Corps. And they touched me and I was warm. Dr. Zinser, maybe you don't know Dr. Zinser. Well, he worked in the roundhouse at Boston, and he told us boys before service, he says, boys, you ought to take up telegraphy. So it was about 20 of us boys took up telegraphy. You know what that is, did. And it was the best thing that was ever happened, because I got into communications and things like that when I was in the tank. I was a radio operator and things like that, see. And they didn't know that. Of course, I took my basic at Fort Knox, Kentucky. When I went to Fort Leavenworth, and they felt me if I was warm, and I was warm, and so they sent me to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and that's where I started my basic. The reason they sent me there was because my dad and I and the boys, we were all tractor drivers, farming ranchers, you see, and they figured I knew how to drive a tractor and know how to drive a tank, yes. But when I went overseas, down to Fort Knox, there was a Colonel Sassy that came out and spoke to us. He said, boys, you are now men. He says, you're going overseas. He says, you're going into a war. He says, I'd go with you, but I'm too old, he said. But he said, boys, you're going into a war, and it's kill or be killed. When he said that, that got to me. After I finished at Fort Knox, Kentucky, then I went to radio school again for about 2 weeks, and then I could send and receive faster than the instructor, so I didn't see any reason to waste my time then. So I went to Fort Meade, Maryland for a processing to get ready to go overseas. And while I was there, I and 2 other boys was called up to the medical corps. And we, in our fatigues, we went up and we thought we was going to probably pick up paper, cigarette butts and whatnot. The major there says, you go home and get your ODs on. We wanted to know why. He says, you're going to work here. So for 9 months I worked with the medical corps. See, that's not the armored corps, see, that's another branch of service. So I worked there for 9 months processing boys for overseas. And then after 9 months, why, there was boys coming back from the service already. So I was sent to Boston, Massachusetts to get on the Aquitania to go overseas. And Aquitania was a sister ship to the Lusitania. And the Lusitania was an English ship, and that Aquitania was the same ship, only the Lusitania got sunk in World War I think. But well, it took us about 7 days, I think, to go overseas. But when we got out in the ocean, about 3 days, they started feeding us boys kidneys. You ever eat kidneys? Oh, well, we had a strike right there because we knew that the Army and Navy and the service had put good beef on board, and so we got that taken care of right fast. And I think we landed at Liverpool, England. And then we took a train down to Swindon. For 6 weeks I went to American School Center, more education, see what I mean? And I wasn't looking for that kind of stuff. And let's see, what else did I do? Oh, and then I called for replacements for overseas. So we got on a ship and went across the channel, France. I can't think of the port there. Anyway, and then after we got on that, got off the ship, and we got on 6x6 trucks and went down to Fontainebleau, France. Fontainebleau, France was Napoleon's castle, see? And so we went through Paris and on down through there. And while we was down there, there was thousands of boys being replacement. See, I went as a replacement, and that's the worst thing you can do. See, you're put in with a tank or whatever it might be. You don't go in as a team, you see. Then after that, I was assigned to the 3rd Armored Division. Not the 3rd Army, but the 3rd Armored, the Spearhead Division. After being with the 3rd Armored, I moved up from driver to radio loader, and then to the gunner. And I guess the reason I was put up as a gunner as a high school boy, I was pretty good at shooting rabbits and coyotes on the go, you know. You get the lead on them, you know how that goes. And so anyway, my Lieutenant Knight was a wonderful lieutenant. He was in charge, and I can tell you a little bit more of that about that. He got killed, and that's the reason I took over his position as tank commander when we was going into Cologne. But before that, well, the Bulge was on. We got in on the Bulge, and that was a cold, cold winter. I'll tell you, it was terrible. And that's when General Peters, or whatever his name, the German general, was counterattacked the United States troops up in the north side. And we was up near Stolberg, and we was around Viviers and Aachen and places like that. I was in a little town of Eupen, and we would just stop there one time overnight, and we happened to be in a potato cellar. Anyway, we were down in this cellar, and we parked our tank outside by the window, and the next morning we got up and out of the potato cellar. We sat down beside a nice big oak table and was going to have our 10 and 1 rations, you know. We were doing real fine until an artillery shell came in the window, like that. It was a dud. It came in, and these duds were made by the people who was not Austrians, I guess might have been Austrians, countries that Germany had captured, you know, and they were camouflaging them, and not only that, they were duds. They filled them with paper and things like that. When they hit, they blew, but they didn't have any shrapnel or anything like that in them. So we were very lucky. I was blown up against a cabinet, kind of like that, a big, you know, these old cabinets, kitchen cabinets. And the boy that was on the other end of the table, he got cut pretty bad from his eye down to his mouth. And a lieutenant had got a broken leg out of the deal, not this lieutenant, but the other. And then we got up out of that and kept going. A lot of things that was amazing and amusing. One time we was asked, the captain said, mount up. So we all mounted up. Of course, before this was when we were in Germany, and we'd been down in a German cellar basement, And this lovely lady, I don't know who she was a German, but she had these half-gallon of cherries, Bing cherries, you know what I mean, big ones. And so I took this half a gallon of Bing cherries out, and I was upstairs eating it in my tank, and, and the captain says, "Mount up." So we mounted up and getting ready to take this next town. And after we took the town, the boys come running over to my tank, and they said, "Roemer, what's the matter? What happened? Who got hit?" I said, "I just lost my cherries." The thing was that of this glass, I'd put it by the turret and right by the hatch, and the Germans, with their small arms far, they had broke it, and the cherry juice was running down the tank. And of course, they thought somebody was hurt. So that was another one of those times when you kind of enjoyed a little bit of it. Then after we got through with the bowls, we headed for Cologne. And the United States Army had bombed Cologne. Only thing standing was the cathedral, the cathedral, you know what I mean, in Cologne. The walls in the cathedral was 5 foot thick, so you couldn't penetrate that. But the bomb craters that was in Cologne, we just completely destroyed Cologne. And they were 1,000-pound bombs dropped around there. There was a Ford factory in Cologne that we went into. But these bomb craters was probably 20 foot deep and 20 foot wide. And I'll tell the rest of that story. But going into, well, I must back up a little bit. That's when my lieutenant, we'd done all our work, and an infantry lieutenant and I, not me, but Lieutenant Knight, had got out and was reconnoitering where we may go next, to this street or that road or whatnot. And this lieutenant stood out there with this infantry lieutenant. They dropped mortar or artillery and killed him right there. Bad deal. He was a very nice guy, told me all about his college career and how he'd come down and how him and his lady friend was going to get married after the war. Oh, I could tell you stories all day about things like that. Just visiting with him, you know. We had another boy that was a dozer, run a dozer, that's on the front of a tank, you know. And we had roadblocks, and we had to call up the dozer boy to bulldoze them out, you know, so that we could go through with our tanks. I was in a medium tank. And he was called up to pull this out, and during the time he got up there, an 88 hit him, went all through the turret, all the way through, out the other side, and lit a haystack on fire. That's how good the 88 was. Oh, it was terrible. It really was. I remember talking with one old German man, and he was a tanker for the Germans. He says, "Well," he says, we knocked out 9 of your tanks, but the 10th one got me." He said, "Oh, they were a terrific gun, I'll tell you." Of course, they had 5-6 years before we got in to go do their training with France and Belgium and Poland and all that. When we went into Germany, all the flags that out of the windows from the houses was before we went into Germany. They were all American flags flashing out there. When we went over the Dragon's Teeth and got into Germany, they were white flags. They didn't want you to blow their house up or anything, so they had those big white flags out there. And oh, that was another experience. Another thing I might tell you is how we crossed the Dragon's Teeth. You know what the Dragon's Teeth were? That was the Maginot and the Siegfried line between France and Germany. They had this in World War I. And it's big in cement abutments about this high, ever so often, so that you couldn't go through there unless you went through the gate. Well, we had some pretty sharp cookies in our outfit, and we noticed that we didn't want to go through that gate because there was a German down there with an 88 ready to hit us. So we called in the dozer man again. After there was another dozer, the other boy got killed. And he pulled up there, and So we set off smoke screens, a smoke screen between us and the enemy. And then we took and bulldozed dirt up there and filled all that up, all those dragon's teeth up. And then we went over it with our tanks and dirt, because we'd fill them full of dirt, Oh yeah, there's things like that. Like I say, I could tell you stories all night.